Welcome to Burning Platforms, our regular look at the politics of technology brought to you by Capita's Centre of the Public Square. I'm Peter Lewis. This week we look at ways of fighting back against AI's theft of our culture with Professor Toby Walsh. But first, our regular look at the latest tech news with Digital Rights Watch Chair Lizzie O'Shea and editor of the Sizzle, Cam Wilson. Well, it's been a fortnight of hacks, leaks and abominations. In other words, just another fortnight in the perpetual sunrise of our glorious tech future. Raking over the coals tonight are our panel. Digital Rights Watch Chair and Australia's premier tech windmill tilter, Lizzie O'Shea. Hi, Lizzie. Cam Wilson, Crikey's man on the tech beat and editor of the Sizzle newsletter. Cam, welcome.
Good to be back.
Welcome back. And it's great to have you sitting in for Dan, who's doing some deal in some corner of the world, I think, otherwise lying on a beach. And Professor Toby Walsh, AI scientist and serial author. His latest is The Shortest History of AI. Welcome to you, Toby, and really looking forward to tapping your knowledge on how those pesky large language models go about their business.
Nice to be back, burning platforms.
Absolutely. We're cooking tonight. Lizzie, let's start off. 6 million Qantas frequent flyers have had their names, email addresses, phone numbers, birth dates, and frequent flyer numbers hacked. Now, maybe the hackers can work out how to secure an upgrade because I still can't. But more seriously, the FBI says this is enough data for identity theft. Is this bad luck or bad management?
Yeah, so I suppose the first thing to say is the information that Qantas seems to have lost in this hack includes not just what you described there, basic stuff like names, addresses and phone numbers that you would expect them to hold, but also things like status credits, tier, frequent flyer points balance. So information that I think could be used to profile you as a consumer, for example, and to make some inferences on how much income you might get or how much you travel as a proxy for how wealthy you are and the like, which might assist with targeting for criminals for data theft or identity theft purposes. So it does seem that people are affected differently. So some people lost a smaller amount of information, but I think it's interesting how much you might be able to infer from some of that material or info associated with a frequent flyer account. This seems to be part of a criminal operation that was known to the FBI. Of course, the investigation is still ongoing, and I think these things generally take some time to fully work out how it occurred. But it appears to involve a third-party provider for customer interface. So Qantas appears to have lost control of the information via a third-party provider that they've done a deal with to manage things like customer engagement. What I would say is this does look like what has occurred in other major data breaches in the past in Australia. So Medibank had a similar issue with a third-party provider. People may remember as well the incident with Clubs New South Wales losing access to their information about their clubs and who had access them, and it was a bit of a controversial story because it involved a third-party provider based in the Philippines who wasn't paid and then stole the information and tried to use it against Clubs Australia to get it back. So it was a criminal conduct, right? But I think this is a growing area of concern for large companies, how they engage with third-party providers, because criminal gangs on the internet will look at the weakest link in a chain when it comes to accessing information, and it appears that third-party providers tend to be the place where they're looking. So I think there's information lost here that could, I think, quite materially increase the risk of data theft and certainly being scammed, basic stuff like that, especially if combined with other data sets that may have been stolen or obtained lawfully. But I think what we're also seeing is a situation where large corporates are dealing with third-party providers of services, often offshore, and that seems to be the weak point in their cybersecurity chain. I'm not sure that's going to be good enough in future. People are pretty irate about this, as you can imagine, and I don't think it's good enough now for Australian companies to allow these things to carry on without doing pretty rigid due diligence and perhaps considering how they may wish to reduce their reliance on third-party providers or also potentially only deal with people that are better vetted, have higher standards, whatever it may be. But I don't think it'll be good enough now for companies that are very, very large to allow cybersecurity breaches like this to continue to occur.
So, Cam, Qantas famously separated its airline business from its frequent flyer business out a few years ago as a data business. So this is a rich trove of data. What's been your observation of the way they've responded to the leak? Because I got an email, but I didn't really understand what to do, I must say.
Yeah, I mean, like the funny thing is when you get these emails, it's like, so all these things have been stolen from you, and you should just really keep an eye out for any crime that happens to you, because it's like, well, like they're saying it's really on you now. The thing that I find really fascinating is Lizzie is exactly right, that it's a third party who's responsible, and I do have sympathy for companies like this, because the due diligence you'd have to go through to kind of understand and vet a business, a third party, would be like exceptional. Because from what we have heard, essentially what happened is someone called up one of this third party provider and said, I am, and they used what they call social engineering, which means just bullshitting to say that I should have access to this. I'm a boss in this company or whatever. And through that, they got access to all of this data. That stuff, social engineering increasingly is the way that you see a lot of these very complicated hacks often happen, because like the technology is very good, but humans are still humans. And, someone who's working there and gets a call from someone who sounds very mad and demands to get into the system because they're your boss, that I'm sure that's worked throughout all of history. But the thing that I kind of find funny is that, Qantas sends this email, and yes, they're trying to say a third party provider was the one who did the leak. And, that means that the rest of the data that we have that wasn't included in that isn't necessarily out there as well. But I do find it a bit, just a little bit of passing the buck. It's this idea that, no, we didn't lose your data. It was this third-party provider who we work with who actually did it. As if that's supposed to be reassuring. It's kind of like saying, no, I didn't.
We're okay. It's just the contractors you need to play.
Totally. Yeah, I borrowed your car, but don't worry, I didn't. I crashed it. Someone else did. I have been a great driver. So, like, I understand. I am sympathetic, but really, the way that we need to understand data is that when you give something to someone, they are the steward of it. They don't own it. They kind of take care of it, and that comes obviously with benefits for them. They can have a better product, but the flip side is they have responsibilities that they have to take care of. I don't care what if whatever your arrangement is with a third party is, as long as my rights are protected, and you need to make sure that's protected as long as I've given this to you.
Toby, I'm sure you're a frequent flyer. I don't know if Qantas is your flavour or not, but what did you make of the whole thing?
Well, if we're going to burn the rich, one interesting piece of factoid I heard was that the data stolen included the people who were members of Qantas's exclusive chairman's lounge. So we now will know shortly who are in the club and who aren't.
Lizzie, this is also I saw you making points earlier in the week about the privacy laws not being fit for purpose on this, and obviously if we did have a course of action, Qantas would probably be in the firing line at the moment.
Totally. So at the moment, your only option in terms of making a complaint about the Privacy Act or a breach of the Australian privacy principles, which does cover this kind of conduct, you're not allowed to allow unauthorised access of personal information. Your only way to make a complaint about that is to the Privacy Commissioner, who is overwhelmed with these kinds of complaints. I think there's room to introduce a direct right of action, so you can go straight to court and sue them. And I think there's utility as a mechanism for obtaining redress, but also as a way of materializing the risk to companies, right? So you can price it and therefore treat it appropriately in the C-suite. The other thing I would say, maybe Toby's got a view on this, is that there is a whole vector around of risk that is, or a surface attack area that is created by using third-party providers that are AI chatbots, for example. There was another little story that I'll just mention quickly about McDonald's using a chatbot for recruitment in the US, and it's a notorious chatbot because people get driven mad because they try and answer these questions to get through the recruitment process at McDonald's, and it can be a difficult process. But someone, basically a researcher, logged on and extracted huge amounts of information of basically everyone who's applied for a job at McDonald's through this AI chatbot. And it did that the researchers did that with relative ease by guessing some passwords. That AI company had very low quality cybersecurity practices in place. And I do wonder whether the drive to integrate AI into many facets of business using external providers for the purpose does increase some of the surface attack area in ways that haven't been anticipated by some of these companies. So, it's finding a weakest link when the chain is very, very long is a lot easier.
Yeah, Toby?
Yeah, unfortunately, generative AI is a whole new spectrum of threat vectors, the ones that Lizzie just mentioned, which is that it's very easy to attack these models and extract data they've been trained on. And then the other part of this attack with social engineering, they're a wonderful way to generate really convincing voices and audio and video of the people who are going to give you permissions and access to things that you shouldn't have. So, unfortunately, this is going to only increase with generative AI attacks.
I was just going to say that also there is actually this other thing that's popped up specifically with hacking and generative AI, where now the AI assistants and agents are actually emerging as a potential way to exploit people. And so there was one with Microsoft Copilot where security researchers were able to send an email that gave prompts to the victim's Microsoft like Outlook, which prompted it to give them data that they weren't supposed to have access to. And there's another one that actually came out today of because you might see now by default, if you open Gmail, at the top of long emails, there are summaries that are auto-generated, and researchers were actually able to through what they were typing the email, get the summary to actually list the wrong email address the wrong website for certain websites that would actually then lead you to kind of phishing expeditions. So now
a spy bot.
Exactly. So now what we're seeing is social engineering isn't just about you, but it's also about the computer that you've actually handed over some of your agency to make these decisions for you.
Good times.
And we probably should mention the latest academic scandal, which is people putting invisible prompts in their academic papers so that when people get chatbots to review them, they write nice reviews for them.
Oh. Because that's a whole nother episode. We better move on, but we are going to keep talking about bots. Cam, Victorian police are embracing AI to assist in what they describe as the formatting of reports through its police assistance line. Is this good bot or bad bot?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's hard to say without seeing the results, but kind of what's happening is that, Victoria Police, like many other police agencies, has these huge tech stacks. And many other organizations, they have a shootload of admin that they have to do. And one of the things they've kind of been trying to deal with is they have is figure out the way for non-serious crime reporting to get into their systems. And so at the moment, you obviously can go into the police station, but you also call up, or increasingly, they're trying to push you towards online forms. And Victoria Police has been working with Salesforce, which for people who don't know is like the biggest company that many people have not heard of. It's just a B2B SaaS that is enormous and it works with like pretty much everyone. And if you don't know what B2B SaaS is, don't worry, I'm not going to bore you by explaining, but they just work with a lot of businesses in ways you wouldn't understand. But one of the things they've been doing with Victoria Police is figuring out, well, how can we make some of these forms kind of better? And, that comes with, even basic things like being like, we've got a little progress bar down the bottom that says how far you are through the form. Or if you've kind of dropped off, we'll remind you, hey, you haven't finished off this form. Would you like to finish off reporting this crime? But the thing that caught my eye and was written up this week by IT News was this also a function that they're incorporating where, so when you report a crime to the form, it goes to a center where people review it, but they're not police. They're kind of administrative staff. And those staff are now have the ability and being encouraged to use a generative AI function, which will rewrite the kind of the submission by the public to make it more understandable in a kind of narrative format by police. And that kind of rung alarm bells for me because, again, I think they said there's 150,000 of these complaints that come through every year just online. So it's obviously a lot to get through, and there must be a whole lot of noise they've got to sort through. But I get really worried when you hear about, institutions, whether it's police forces, whether it's government agencies, deciding to filter submissions by the public through AI before the person who's actually making decisions on them ever get to see them. We saw a similar thing where Treasury was testing whether AI could be used to summarize public submissions to an inquiry. They came away thinking it wasn't quite there yet. I think that even if these were there, I kind of really worry what's going to happen if people now expect that if they make a complaint to a public authority, it's not even going to be seen by a person before someone, it's summarized, it's changed, maybe even errors introduced. I think it could actually have a really damaging impact on people's trust in these institutions, this idea that they're actually listening to.
Lizzie, have you got concerns?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that your general concerns, as you've expressed it, Cam, are valid. There's a real question around what the purpose is of summarizing this material, I suppose, or finding ways to get through it quicker. I feel I'm not sure what it's being used for. As in, is it being used to accelerate people's reporting of crime? Does that facilitate more fraudulent reporting or more reporting that is motivated by malevolent intent? Who knows? Does that then end up influencing other kind of the analytics of the system overall that doesn't capture or analyze some of these potential concerns, end up influencing other policy making that occurs based on that information? To me, it might be creating problems and not necessarily introducing efficiencies that are meaningful. So, I think it's a playbook we see in lots of different social services that does sort of accelerate getting through things like paperwork, but maybe doesn't actually solve problems that are the reasons that the paperwork is there for. It does feel, it's interesting reading the reporting on it, talking about how predictive policing was this huge thing in, 2016, 17, 18. I remember there were a lot of models being sold to police forces in the US where I was living at the time, and it was a huge topic about its various biases and problems. And, people would talk about how crime data is being used to predict where policing might be most needed in a community, but that's usually a reflection of not what crime occurs, but what the state's response to crime is, right? So how does then, increasing the capacity of people to report things that then has to be filtered through a police analytics process, does that create a whole new data set that is then used to map out the state's response to crime, but is used as a justification to say that crime is being dealt with, or these are the metrics we now have to comply with? I get a bit concerned when these systems are created without a clear idea of what good looks like, and I'm not sure the good that is envisaged by the system is something I agree with. I suppose it does also just feel like quite a return to some of those old days of predictive policing being this great new system, which I think has largely been debunked. And so I wonder if we're being required to have this argument again in circumstances where we shouldn't.
To be fair, this is large number of complaints using sorting and ordering to manage the flow. They would argue to deal with complaints quicker and look for patterns and grouping. Is this a good use of AI, Toby, or is this something
I'm
where
going to be much less cynical than the rest of the panel here tonight.
that's what we hate to have one view.
I'd be the first, to caution about RoboCop and predictive policing, but here, I think the intent was largely to reduce the bureaucratic overhead of reporting crime, and if we can spend more of our resources on policing and less of it on filling in bits of paper, that's probably a good thing. And let's mention some of the other positives. So, for example, chatbots can speak in every language under the sun. You can report crime now in Syrian or whatever language it is, without actually any extra cost to the police, and have that translated into a language that the police officer can understand. So I can see some benefits, and I can also see this, if it really is a mundane backroom transcription of crime that hasn't been properly captured in the past, actually being a net positive.
Where would you be looking for the red lines, though, or where would the flashing signals be for you, Toby? Where is the point where you'd go, hold on, this is beyond the processing of basic information.
Well, I mean, we're going to see this in a lot of other places. We're seeing this in medicine, for example. Now, if when at the end of a shift, nurses in an ER room are now using AI to help them transcribe, all the ongoing work that they've done and case notes for the incoming doctors and nurses. That's a good thing, largely. I mean, you obviously got to be careful of the mistakes that might creep in, the biases that might creep in. But nurses never liked doing that stuff. That was never a good use of their time. Now they can spend more time with patients. So being able to just do this, routine back office stuff with AI more efficiently is largely a good thing. Although, of course, if that's taking jobs away from people, that's another conversation we need to have. If this SaaS company is now employing less people because it's done more efficiently, then you have to worry, well, what happened to those people?
Final right of reply, Cam?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't get a chance to mention, but Toby had a chance to talk about the other generative AI stuff that's happening with it. Seemed cool, being able to have a chatbot that can help through a process. I'm like, great, make these things more accessible. I think I see a lot of benefit for generative AI features that are, for example, helping guide someone through a process, maybe like helping translate. I just have a real concern about the way the whole world's heading, and this idea that people are going to feel like when they contact public institutions that what they're actually saying is not being heard more than it is already now, because it's not only is there a pile of it, but it's also being ingested through a machine that doesn't pick up the subtleties on these things. And I think even if they're great, I worry about what's going to happen to trust in these places. But I guess we'll see soon enough.
I feel the same way about submissions. Like, I understand that government doesn't want to read the submissions, but it doesn't make it an inspiring process to make a submission to a government department if you know it's not going to be read, if you know it's going to be fed through a chatbot. Maybe I should put prompts in there, Toby. You need to tell me how, so that it'll be elevated to the top of the pile.
Prompts in there.
But yeah, I guess that's what I was trying to say. Like,
exactly.
But if that's your intention to not read it, why are you creating a system to report it? I suppose is my point. Like, perhaps could be better.
My trust was broken by the humans running the system when they only gave an hour or a day to put in submissions.
Yeah.
We're going to move on with a very high-tech musical interlude. I've never done this before, but I'm trying to record off my iPhone. Let's see how they go. You hear that?
Yeah.
Otherwise, Beck will have to... This is Dust on the Wind, as it's boots on the ground, smoke in the sky. Yeah, and it goes on and on. That's Velvet Sundown. Now, Velvet Sundown is my special topic tonight because Velvet Sundown is kind of on one level, a Laurel Canyon circa 1970s meets Muzak kind of easy to listen to music. The dudes with wind in their hair, they've had a video and 2 albums, but it's all AI generated, and it kind of has come out as either an art hoax or an actual hoax, depending who's backgrounding The Guardian. It's clocked more than 1.3 million downloads on Spotify, including, as of today, me.
Would have made quite a bit of money on Spotify then.
Oh, like that's what's that? I think it's about 0.35 cents a download. So probably made a couple of.
Yeah, probably pays with ChatGPT for a month.
Look, my original thought when I listened to this was this is incredibly sad music. I listened to it while walking my dog this evening, and the songs are total earworm. They instantly settle as something that seems like something you're used to, like it just goes in. But then my playlist went to Sufjan Stevens singing about his mother dying and Bon Iver's paean to his journey through depression. And then I got Amy Winehouse roaring away through addiction. And I can't explain why, but I just don't think music that's produced without the human behind it is the same. And I just found it very vexing.
I think
the notes all join up, but there's no heart and no context there. And, maybe that's the experience with all generative AI, Toby.
Well, I think Spotify's AI algorithms calling the Samaritans for your benefits so shortly.
Yeah, please. I wish they would. I need my companion to play me some soothing music by a human. But, look, there's so much about this story I think needs unpacked.
Would you realise that it was AI generated if you hadn't known it?
Probably not. Look, it seemed like it could have just been candy folk, but the fact that it was processing the work of human artists who have been the victims of theft of their work. Been reading a bit of Nick Cave, who talks about replication by travesty. Then there's all the analysis around Spotify, Liz Pelly's book Mood Machine, that Spotify is basically algorithmically running our playlist and then running algorithms of the music to fit into our algorithmic playlist. So, on one level, the context of the reporting of this was a call for Spotify to inform listeners they were consuming AI-generated content. But is that enough? Or does this demand something more decisive? Discuss.
I definitely have 10 years ago, I proposed what I called the Turing's red flag, which is we should be told when it's AI we're talking to, AI we're listening to, AI that's trying to entertain us, because we will be easily fooled, and our time is our most precious asset.
But is there a positive use case in this at all? Is there a positive use case in developing technology that replaces the audience for humans to producing culture? What is the upside of this? And it's based on theft, and I want to get to that later, Toby. But I'm interested in Liz and Cam. Am I just old?
In terms of the upside, I mean, it changes the world in the sense that it may open opportunities which previously it wasn't worth paying humans for. So, I mean, one of the arguments put forwards is that the audiobook market is going to be revolutionized because previously it was too expensive to make audiobooks of all books. In my first couple of books I wrote, the publisher said to me, "Oh, you're not going to sell enough books for us to make an audiobook."
Now they can just take one of your papers and turn it into a podcast with somebody cracking cheap jokes about it.
Now, because it's much cheaper to make audiobooks because of all the AI tools.
And the books are much better,
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So you've got Melania Trump's audiobook, which she neither wrote nor read now, but it's read by an AI. She had nothing to do with the construction of the book.
Cam, am I just old? Should I care about this?
No, you should. I'm going to give two takes on it. I'm going to first talk about my own music habits, which is that, when I have music on in the background when I'm working. I like to have music without words. I listen to a lot of Hans Zimmer movie soundtracks. Also, what's his guy name? The 9 Inch Nails guy who now does all the movie soundtracks as well. They're all awesome soundtracks, but honestly, it's just kind of music in the background. I can kind of see why companies like Spotify love this stuff because, to be honest, and I don't mean this is probably upsetting for some people to hear, but when I'm consuming, listening to music in that sense, kind of just having something to be on the background, and I'm not super discerning. And so, could AI music slip into that? I think very easily and very clearly. That's kind of what Spotify wants to do in Liz's book, which you mentioned. They talk about how Spotify already has these kinds of little studios where they pay artists to produce kind of generic sounding songs to put in their popular playlists as a way of reducing the amount of royalties they're paying out. So you might put on a jazz playlist, and then you might hear Miles Davis, and some of the a couple of cents goes to his estate. But then they're also going to play one that's an artist that they paid a one-time fee, which means they don't need to then actually pay any more, and it's cheap with them. Soon, and in fact it may even be happening now, that'll just be replaced by Spotify, just with AI artists, cut the people out altogether. So obviously there's some kind of use in that commercially for them. But in terms of the idea of art,
I don't think that's a positive.
Well, I mean, for
unless you're Spotify wants to make money.
But in terms of offerings, I'm trying to say in terms of offering something cheaper to people, at the end of the day, that means that Spotify might be cheaper That means that I don't have to pay for, the hours that I'm just kind of listening to generic
I don't
music.
think they're going to drop down your they're not going to drop down your monthly subscription fee because you're listening to slop.
True.
And the problem is that the human artists who don't get any money at all now.
And at the very least, the business model, I think, is to build an audience and then go and at least perform live. And the AI is never going to perform live, so you're cutting that kind of out of. What about you, Lizzie? You like choral music. Like, would you listen to an AI-generated choir over, your tenors and your sopranos and all those people that you like to hang out with?
No, I'm not interested in. I must say, I'm not interested in listening to music that someone hasn't written. I just think it's good practice not to, personally. But I don't listen to music a lot while I'm working and stuff. So, but even then, like, why? Yeah, what is it that you get out of? Anyway, it doesn't appeal to me at all. The only other story I like that comes out of this is about a year ago, there was a guy arrested for creating fake music that then he set up a bunch of fake listeners to listen to and then extracted $10 million from Spotify over 7 years. That, I think, is a good use of fake music, I must say. But I don't use Spotify at all. So I was Googling this because I was interested to know a bit more about this story, but there seems to be articles going back nearly 10 years talking about this. Like, this is not a new phenomenon that they've been creating fake music, presumably to populate playlists in the way that you're describing, Cam. I don't know what's captured your information about this, Peter, except maybe they've found a niche that specifically appeals to you and
it went into my niche.
Dad music.
Dan got worried. Dan was very upset about it too, and then I think I just adopted his issue for the week, and then I just started listening to it, and then I became a sad dad. Cam, you said you had two takes. Sorry, I jumped in.
Oh, no, that's okay. Yeah, no, I didn't want to monopolize. Yeah, I was going to say the other one is that I'm just thinking about like how AI is affecting just these general creative fields, whether it's music or whether it's, journalism that I think about all the time. I think that people I was talking about one kind of purpose before, and I think I would call that kind of ambient music listening to be very kind of like passive. And I think that that's kind of threatened by like AI stuff, which, I generally, when I try to describe it, I'm like, the stuff that AI puts out is like good enough to just convince you if you're not paying attention to it. But in terms of the stuff that's like, am I going to go listen to an AI band? Like, obviously not, because obviously music is more than just the band, but also it's just not as good as the top stuff. In the same way that I don't think that like AI writing will replace journalism, because there's just, many of the things that you can't do when you're just inside the computer. I think what this does is it means that like, there's going to be a whole lot of undifferentiated slop, and that means that that's a lot of challenge for some people. But it also means that now if you're in any of these industries, you just have to realize that the game is never going to be scale. You're not going to make money by churning out as many songs as you can, by churning out as many articles to hit SEO. You have to do stuff that's differentiated, that is ultimately human, that resonates with people in a way that AI can't, because machine learning, LLMs, they're all based on past training. You've got to be thinking, what can I do that's going to be almost like the thing that machine would love to train on in the future, the things that set the trends and resonate with people in a way that hasn't happened before.
If only we had an AI engineer in the house. Maybe we'll shift the conversation. I do want to keep this going with you, Toby, but just to introduce the very few people that listen to our podcast that don't know who you are. Like you were working for decades in this field before it became the thing. Like, when did you realize you were cool?
I'm still waiting to realise I'm cool.
I've seen your shirts.
Because I have been working for decades. Australia actually has led the way in AI-generated songs. The first Eurovision AI Song Contest won by an Australian group, Uncanny Valley. My friends at Uncanny Valley wrote the song Australia for the Australian entry for the very first Eurovision AI Song Contest.
I'll have to dig that one out for the backdrop as well. And, I think
it's full of kookaburras and other Australiana.
The other thing that you do is write a lot of popular books, like pulp nonfiction, and some of them are on my shelves, and it's been a great guide for me over the years. 2062 was, I think, my first book you wrote, Faking It, Machines Behaving Badly. What makes you want to do the writing part as well as the research part? Like, what does that give you?
It gives me great interest to come on fun shows like this, to I think, bust some of the myths. I mean, there's a lot of misconceptions about AI. There's a lot of hype, There's a lot of Hollywood. And it's important for people, because it is going to be quite transformative. I'm pretty convinced of that people have an understanding of where it's taking us and the choices that they need to make, so that they get benefit out of this technology. So I think it's my responsibility as a scientist who spent the last 40 years working in the field to help do that. And also for myself, I mean, writing is actually a way to understand things. I would write the book so I could understand where it's taking us. I wrote, Faking It because generative AI came out, and I thought I better get on top of this and understand where it's taking us. So that's the thing that worries me, though, about how when we hand over some of the writing to generative AI, is that may dumb us down, because writing is a way for us to think about things. It's the ultimate way of thinking about things. It's the ultimate way of communicating with each other, of constructing arguments, of being able to analyze issues. And so if we start outsourcing that to AI, I worry that we're going to be dumbing ourselves down.
I mean, this is exactly what Emily Bender says. Writing is thinking. So if you aren't doing that writing yourself and you're outsourcing, you're engaging cognitive offloading to large language models, then you end up not thinking about it in the same way. And I wonder how real you think the risk is of losing cognitive capacity by becoming reliant on these models, because some of the early research suggests that it is a very real risk. But I also appreciate that this field, and I don't know whether you've got views on this either, produces a lot of research quite rapidly that is often quite small samples, often with experiments. Like, it's necessarily kind of an iterative process of understanding the impacts of these technologies. And I wonder whether you feel like there's a bit of signal and through that noise, or there is a lot of noise in the research space in terms of tracking some of these risks.
Oh, you're right. I mean, there's some worrying preliminary evidence. There was a study out of MIT recently, which looked at people's brains as they were using large language models to write essays, or not using large language models, and showing that there was much less brain activity in those people who were using the language models. And also, they actually looked at people's understanding of the topic and people's engagement with the topic, and that people who use the language model were much less engaged. So there is some worrying evidence, that aligns with one's intuitions, that if you're not exercising yourself as much on the problem, you're not going to be as engaged in it. And some another interesting study I saw recently, which is that the human language has already been changed by language models. So they looked at the language that people use in YouTube videos, the spoken language that people are now using in YouTube videos since November 22, when ChatGPT came out. And the word usage and the sentence construction is increasingly like that of language models. We're using words like dwell that only language models tend to use, and using the sorts of long sentence constructions and breaking everything down into three adjectives, three adverbs.
On the one hand, on the other hand.
Yes, that language models do. So we're becoming human language is becoming more like chatbots.
One thing I wanted to get your wisdom on, it's something that I've become very excited about in my way of going ankle deep into something that's got a lot more behind it. But I'm really keen to understand better the idea of data poisoning. I came across this paper, University of Chicago computer scientist Ben Zhao and his group, basically putting filters over art to not just make it harder for the languages to take the content, but actually trick them into thinking it's something it was, almost like putting ink in a bag of notes after a bank robbery. Is that just a cute experiment, or is that doable and scalable, particularly around, IP, around culture, which is what
it's
we were
a
talking
wonderful
about
example of how people have taken what might seem to be a weakness of these AI models and turned it into something positive. So this goes to the one of the issues that we skated around with the AI songs, which is that the other insult to artists, not only are we taking away their work, was that these models only exist because they were trained on vast corpuses of people's artists' work. without their consent, without any compensation. All the musicians, all the authors, all the graphic designers whose work now is being used to drive these models, how these people can fight back. And it's exploiting a weakness of AI models, which is that all AI models that we know, they're what are called adversarial examples. You can make a really minute change. You can change a pixel in a picture, or a single note in the song, and you can fool the AI model into thinking that picture of a banana is actually a gun, or that picture of a tortoise is a gun. A human would not be fooled by a single pixel change, but the AI model is. So the models are remarkably brittle, much more so than humans in their perception. And what people have done is exploited that weakness by finding those little single small changes, so that if you try and train on your pictures or your music, that it will come out as something rubbish, not as
They've also been using it on photos to stop facial
yes,
recognition.
the graphic designers can upload their pictures onto the web so people can see them and buy them, but they change a few of these pixels so that if you use that to train your AI model on, it will come out as rubbish. It's something completely different. They won't look.
And I assume there's nothing illegal about that because they're the ones stealing from you, so you can alter anything they're stealing off you.
Indeed, and this is
Cool.
a lovely way of exploiting an AI model's weakness to actually provide protection to authors. I mean, the sad thing is that authors have to think about doing this, and of course, as ever, you can try and fight back against this. There's tricks that you can, once you know that people put these filters in, that you can try and fight against
Unfilter. Cam.
Toby, I know you've had your own books stolen this. There has been a few recent US legal cases that have gone against the authors who were suing AI companies who had taken their work. But those were largely cases where the companies had actually obtained they obtained the books or whatever in illegal ways. They hadn't paid the artists. Putting aside all of the legality of copyright law, which is obviously it's a law that's been around for a long time and far comes afterwards modern AI. Do you think that we should be treating an AI model legally differently to someone just buying a book and reading it and then producing knowledge from that?
Yes, and we should definitely be treating it. I mean, to go to those cases first, which is the final insult. Not only do they train on my books and Peter's books and everyone's books without our consent, without any compensation, they didn't buy even the copy that they trained on. That was a stolen copy. And indeed, in the lawsuits, that was the one part that the authors have won so far, which is that you're actually training on something that you've stolen. That's not actually fair at all. That cannot be fair use. You haven't even bought the one copy. But in terms of whether we should, one of the arguments put forward is that, well, if I read a book, I can build on the ideas in a book. That's how art works. All artists stand on the shoulders of the previous artists before them, and musicians adapt the tunes of other musicians. Painters paint based upon the styles and influences they have of other painters. AI models are doing just the same, aren't they? They're not. And they're not in a fundamental way, which is that they're doing it on a scale which is superhuman, inconceivable in terms of the number of books that they've read. A human could not read that number of books in a lifetime. And there's plentiful evidence that they actually encode significant chunks of the text. So they will, if you prompt them rightly, they'll produce articles from the New York Times which are actually behind the paywall, word for word. Or they're how I convinced my publisher that they're trained on my book. I said, well, you can find a very good summary of chapter 3.
So can I ask you then, Toby, the other news that came out recently is that Cloudflare is taking action to stop web crawlers, because that's the other way in which I suppose some of these models are brittle. I mean, it's not actually about attacking the model, but it's about attacking the process through which these models acquire data, and they use web crawlers to do it. I mean, you probably can explain this better than me, but I do wonder what you think about using that as a mechanism to place limits on what can be obtained by AI companies for inputting into their data. Maybe you can explain what a content delivery network is, or what Cloudflare is doing in this context.
This is a wonderful example, actually, of how we're deceived into thinking. We thought the internet was this distributed network where no one owns it. It was designed to be, proof against a nuclear war, and no one owns it, no one can control it. And it turns out that's actually false. There are actually there's some major bottlenecks in the system. We should have realized this when this company Cloudflare had a major meltdown of a 0-day fraud, and there was lots of blue screens on Microsoft machines because we realized that they actually provided a lot of the infrastructure, domain name lookup that allows the internet to work. And it turns out that they and a few small other number of firms do provide the basic infrastructure that allows the cloud, the internet to exist. And if they choose, which Cloudflare decided out of their generosity to say, you can only put spiders out to crawl the web, to take all this content in to train your AI models, if your spiders, your crawlers are respecting the copyright notices on the web, and they are a little bottleneck that we didn't really think about, that could actually decide that the only people who can train their models are people who are actually doing it in a way that respects people's copyright. So it's a wonderful example of how the internet is not as distributed and independent as we think it is, and there are a few bottlenecks, and we can exploit those few bottlenecks.
Of course, the other way to get around breaching copyright law is to rewrite copyright law. It was interesting in OpenAI's blueprint for Australia, released a couple of weeks ago. One of the areas they wanted policy change was copyright. We also know BCA and other industry groups are pushing for a right to data mine, which seems like an overreach. But do you have it there is this thing that this is an amazing natural resource, it's our joint resource, and yes, everybody might have an individual claim on it, but it's really our collective, so we should be able to grab it to make everyone smarter, not dumber. Do you have any sympathy with that argument, Toby, or where do you think the holes in it lie?
I wrote a piece, an opinion piece for, I think it was the AFR, about 6 months ago. And I remember the title the piece ended up with, I thought was a bit melodramatic. I called it the greatest heist in human history, which was the world's knowledge, the world's cultural knowledge, the world's scientific knowledge, the world's geographical knowledge. Everything we know is being ingested by these machines at no cost. To the great benefit, their great benefit, great amounts of wealth is being generated. We're seeing hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars of wealth being generated for these companies, which is based on the backs of human labor. It's both the artists that we were talking about earlier, but also scientists and economists and just the general public who are providing social meme data and everything else that's being ingested into these bots and whose value is being totally taken. So I think this is the greatest heist in human history. It's happening before our eyes. And it will be to our poverty if we allow it to happen without making sure. I like to compare this back to the noughties and Napster. When we started streaming music, when we discovered that you could stream music, the world's music was suddenly available to everyone and anywhere. And to begin with, that was all stolen. And that wasn't going to work. That wasn't going to be a sustainable place for musicians. There's no way that music could flourish if we just always stole the music. And we've moved to a model where we pay people for streaming. I'm not sure we pay them enough. And certainly the jobbing artist, we probably pay Taylor Swift enough, but we don't pay the jobbing artist enough still. But at least it's a more sustainable position where we pay people to stream music. And I think we can't steal all the other content and knowledge of the planet from the people who are creating it without that being a loss to our culture.
Paying them if they are real people, not AI creations. So can I just ask a question as well? the thing that like I've been worrying, you're talking about this big heist and comparing it to like Napster. The difference to me, and that really worries me, is that it's a handful of companies that have actually taken all this data and now are kind of, selling back access to it. And the way that I kind of see the dynamics of AI and the business at the moment is that so much of this power is being centralized in a few hands. And even if, you see Cloudflare, doing things that mean that we can start to protect it, you're kind of like pulling up the ladder behind you, but that in some ways, solidifies the power of the people who've already done the heist. My kind of question is like, just generally, do you think that these dynamics of centralization, that now there's a handful of major companies who are the only one who have both the combination of the training data, but also the resources to produce these models, is that just going to be inherent to what we're going to deal with in this kind of new era of technology, of the kind of, the AI, generative AI era? Or is there other things, other ways of using this technology that mean that it wouldn't, like, that it will kind of diffuse this power so it's not just centralized in those few businesses' hands?
Well, I think the good news is that intelligence works in a very well in a distributed fashion, right? Intelligence today is distributed amongst the 8 odd billion people on the planet, and it works quite well in a distributed fashion. So, my long-term view, AI is not going to end up. There's not going to be just one super AI, whether it's Grok or GPT-5 or whatever it is. There's going to be 8 billion intelligences. Each of us is going to have our own on our own devices. So, in that sense, the long-term prospects I think are that it will be owned by us all, each of us with our own intelligence. But at the moment, it's certainly seeing concentration of power, and OpenAI was set up to ensure that we all profited from AI, and has now become definitely not open and definitely not for all of us. It's become a profit-seeking enterprise.
Do you think, Toby, though, that that's created a moat for others? Like, as in, do you think that those data sets, they need to be dynamic, though, that they constantly, because one of the challenges that the models are always hungry for more data, not just because they want to train for more sophisticated outputs, but also because they have to stay relevant to people and up to date. I mean, is part of locking publishers into deals for back catalogs, for example, and other kinds of content, doing deals with other websites and the like, is that, if more of the web is locked down to prevent that kind of behavior, do you think they'll be able to continue to use that initial acquisition as a moat against competitors?
I think the biggest moat is money. That they've got access to such large money that it's hard for other people to compete.
Is that about talent, do you think, or is it about, because it's also about, I think, probably influencing laws,
That's now buying talent and compute.
Okay.
But the good thing about data and why it's only a temporary advantage is, as you point out, you want the data to be timely, and the world keeps on moving on, so you need to keep on updating the data set. So having last year's data isn't actually particularly helpful, because you only get out-of-date responses. So you've got to keep on collecting the latest data, which is why it was actually he may not have realized it, but Elon Musk buying Twitter was a fantastic move for getting access to up-to-date data on the latest trends, because that's what you will find on X. But
until you poison it,
he seems to be doing that quite effectively. So maybe that's
he didn't need a program to do that. He just goes in there and hacks it directly.
Does it himself.
Look, I is this right? Like, there is a bit of hostility between those of you who have built your careers around AI and the shiny generative chatbot model taking over the world. Like, how does that play out in your world? I imagine they pay incredible amounts of money to some of your peers, but is there skepticism within the academy around these models?
Well, there's skepticism when people talk about AGI appearing in the next year or the next 2 years, and that scale is all that you need. And you look at, from a serious scientific perspective, at the weaknesses of these models and the fact that they're terrible at reasoning and they're terrible at arithmetic, and they still can't get the goat and the wolf and the cabbage across the river in the boat without making silly mistakes.
I can't really do that either, so.
I've never tried.
Or they don't know how many R's in strawberry and all these other silly things that they fail on. So I mean, they're idiot savants at best, spectacular in some ways, but also incredibly stupid in other ways, and that is still a large mountain to climb, and we're not going to solve that very quickly at all, even if you throw hundreds of millions or billions of dollars at the problem.
There is this tendency, though. Well, there's this tendency, I think, to create this theory of mind around them, though, because they are so good at the savant bit is so good. They're so good at duplicating or replicating what we might say to them, that then that we end up melding our mind around their way of working. And that's, I guess, my worry, because it makes it more difficult to recognize when they're saying things that are nonsense.
Yeah.
But
most of this, I think, is a criticism of human intelligence. I actually think that most of what we're saying is actually reflecting on that we've overestimated huge amounts of human intelligence. That the fact that the bots can write a decent business letter is because actually a lot of human communication was quite formulaic. We overestimated what intelligence we needed to write a business letter was. And we put too much.
Well, I mean, but it may be that there's a canon of human knowledge that it can train on. So it may be that it still requires skills to do it, by a human alone. But if you have a canon of knowledge, like I don't think you're wrong, but there may be multiple reasons why that's true. But the other component, I suppose, is that I saw an interesting analysis of this. It's like the inversion of the Marxist quote, that the Marx quote, I should say, which is, philosophers have only interpreted the world. The point is to change it. Well, the argument is that this kind of computing allows you to interpret the world, but you shouldn't necessarily change it, because relying on it for judgments about what to do next is the problem, because you're not necessarily clear about what might be a valid inference based on good data if you haven't got access to transparency over them, those kinds of aspects of the model. But instead, you can use it to highlight what parts of human intelligence are the weakest parts and what kind of bias exists in human thinking that you can correct. Like, there is a mode of operating where these models are used to illuminate human intelligence rather than replace or shape human intelligence to suit that model.
Yeah, I think though, what worries me most though is that they're a filter through which to see human knowledge, and that we're increasingly seeing the content that we see on the web is filtered through them. It's either selected by the algorithms, or it's content that they have synthesized or generated. And our perspective of the world will be the perspective that the bots have been serving up, and which is terribly worrying when we know that they have a very shoddy grasp on truth and veracity, and that the political choices are being made in how they are trained, in what they say and how they say it, and that is going to be reflected back in us.
I actually saw something that made me think of this, Toby, which it was a product launched by someone there are now these AI browsers which are kind of bringing in chatbot features into browsers. But this person actually created a browser that interpreted every single web page you went to through an LLM and actually rewrote it. And obviously it's like just this cool little experiment to kind of see, well, you could preference it be like, hey, every page I go to, can you please write in a way that's shorter and, can explain for me and my preferences. But it made me realize that we're actually very, very close to the kind of point where literally all of our experiences, online could be through a personalized filter in a way that has never been done before. If you think we have problems with agreeing on facts now, imagine until everyone is literally having all their information coming through this bot, which, on one hand is supposed to be personalized towards you, but also serves the commercial interest of whoever owns it and runs it as well.
Indeed, but then we've been falling down the slope for years.
I know. I
mean, the news articles that you see on your social media feeds, those were chosen for you, not for someone else. And you see a different version of reality by those choices that the algorithm was making. Now we're actually going to say, well, it's not only the choices the algorithm's going to make, it's the content is going to be, filtered through those algorithms as well, so that it reflects your politics, or it reflects your left-wing views, or your right-wing views, or your libertarian views, or your Marxist views, or whatever you want it to be, or whatever they want it to be. So because it's going to be more commercially successful for them.
So can I wrap this up by asking you to help me with my homework, Tony? So I've got a column.
For surely.
I've got a column due, which I want to write around the movie Idiocracy, which I think is an absolute classic, 2006. I don't know if you've seen it, Toby, but an everyman goes in a time machine and wakes up in 500 years' time, and he's a genius. And the world is run by, it was made in 2006, but the world's run by a wrestler. A wrestler is president. A sports street corporation controls the world, and everyone worships the prophet, PRFIT.
This sounds like the next US presidential election to me, but anyway.
I know, but I want to make the point we're at this crossroads between an idiocracy and a smart future, and I can see the pathway to idiocracy. I think it's embedded in OpenAI's blueprint for Australia. I can't see the smart road. Give me a few clues on what the smart road is to not end up where if I wake up in 500 years' time, I'm a genius.
Terrifying thought.
I know.
The smart move is if we make some good choices today, and we realise that there's places where the technology is going to add to our lives.
But where are those? What's the roadmap to make the smart
So, for example,
it feels like we're going dumb.
Us living healthier lives by coming up with new drugs and new therapies for all the diseases that afflict humankind, using it to improve the quality of our education system. As an example, I was listening to my daughter the other day, revising for an exam. She had an hours-long conversation with ChatGPT, and I got it to explain, her biology to her. I thought, this is absolutely fantastic. It's late at night. Her teacher's not going to be able to answer any questions, but there she is, being able to have all her questions answered by the chatbot. So those are the sorts of things I think that will improve humanity. But equally, we've got to be careful that we don't end up dumbing ourselves down because we're no longer writing, we're no longer constructing our own arguments. That we've put all the artists out of work because we've only got AI-generated slop now that's entertaining us.
At least we'll have Velvet Sundown to put us to sleep at the end of the night.
Our culture is infinitely diminished by the things that, life is not just about, providing work for us, but it's also about the culture that we've made and the world that we've made with it.
And I really like that idea of the distributive intelligence as opposed to concentrated intelligence. I think I might steal that bit as well. If that's okay.
We'll all have an AI assistant that helps us.
You can be my bot any day, Toby. Thanks for joining us tonight. Hey Cam, thanks a lot for you as well. If people don't subscribe to the Sizzle, do you want to give the elevator pitch?
Yeah, sure. It's a daily tech newsletter I write in Australia. It's written entirely by humans, no AI involved. And it's a couple bucks a month. You can go to thesizzle.com.au.
Great. And if anyone wants to talk about this show, we now have our little closed community in the digital sandpit. You're all welcome to come and join us and share articles and ideas. I'll send both of you guys an invite now that you're part of our Burning Platforms alumni, or return members of the alumni too. Lizzie, thanks for making the time on the Shazlons as always. And
thanks for having me.
Yeah, I know. I was waiting for you to say something profound then, but it didn't come out, did it? But I didn't really leave the space. But we'll be back again in a fortnight. So thanks, everyone.
You've been listening to Burning Platforms. It was recorded on July 15 and produced on Nam land by Rebecca Connell. Talk again soon.